June 15th was the second hottest day the summer of 2022 in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I was outside working my first job after graduating from undergrad, Honeybee research technician. Clearly, they weren't looking for anybody with any actual prior beekeeping experience, and I promise I did not lie on my resume. But after being thrown into the middle of an apiary, surrounded by rows and rows of honeybee colonies, I quickly went from being completely clueless to basically being a beekeeping pro. But sort of knowing what I was doing didn't make it any less hot outside. Covered head to toe in beekeeping gear, bangs absolutely glued to my forehead, I eventually understood why it is bees get more aggressive the later in summer it gets. I also get angrier the hotter it gets. This was also the day that I got my first bee sting while working this job. Now, I'd been stung by bees before, of course, but this one was different. This one was like a badge of honor, and it had taken weeks for me working this job to finally get this first bee sting, which was something my boss at the time, Phoebe, would not let me hear the end of. After I got my single bee sting, Phoebe informed me that on her first day of working as a beekeeper, she got stung 80 times. I can't imagine. She told me that her boss didn't tell her what to wear during her first day, so she showed up wearing black leggings. And if you don't know, you're not supposed to wear darker colored clothing while out working with bees because it reminds them of their predators, such as bears and skunks. But the real problem with this is that when one bee stings something, it sends out an alarm pheromone that tells all the other bees in the hive to come attack this threat, to defend their home, meaning that one sting can quickly turn into many. So poor Phoebe went home that day with 80 bee stings. She used to say that this alarm pheromone smelled like bananas. She said this with a great fondness, and honestly don't feel too bad for her about the 80 bee stings because while we were out together working with the bees, she often wore shorts. Some of you may have heard of this dance that honeybees do to tell each other how far away food is from the hive called the waggle dance. But this waggle dance and the banana-scented alarm pheromone are just two examples of signals honeybees are constantly sending each other throughout the hive. We studied another one of these signals while I was working as a honeybee technician. This specific one protects brood. Honeybee brood refers to these waxy cells here. These cells can contain eggs, larvae, or pupa. The white sections here are the larval stage. And once honeybees reach the pupal stage, worker bees go and cap the cell with wax, and the bee continues to grow underneath. Eventually, a fully grown bee bursts out of the wax. These developing bees have been the target to one of the biggest threats to honeybee colonies, the Varroa destructor mite. This kind of reminds me of a Marvel supervillain. Sorry, I'm a nerd. But it really is just as destructive as it sounds. This Varroa mite is able to enter these waxy cells as the worker bees go to cap them at the pupal stage. They enter the cell, they latch onto the developing bees, and reproduce as this bee continues to grow. Eventually, the developed bee emerges. The Varroa mite is still attached, continuing to feed on this bee and weaken it, and now it's able to spread viruses throughout the entire hive. Over time, this can completely destroy an entire colony. But honeybees are not completely defenseless against the Varroa mite. Some colonies exhibit what's called Varroa-sensitive hygienic behavior. This behavior is when honeybees within the hive are able to detect when something within the brood cells just isn't quite right. So they detect that something is wrong, they uncap this cell, check on what's inside, and they can either recap the cell if everything seems okay, or they can completely remove the infested brood before the infestation spreads. So how do they know which cells to even investigate in the first place? Infested brood release a specific chemical signal, like a distress call. And when worker bees detect these signals, they exhibit this Varroa-sensitive hygienic behavior, and the infected brood is then removed. I moved on from this job with lots of new skills and many jars of honey. One of the best parts of this job was being able to share this honey with my grandparents. And in case you were wondering, yes, that is Phoebe's gloveless hand right there. This summer also gave me a better understanding of why bees do some of these seemingly crazy things they do, like stinging leggings. They do these things to protect their home, to keep it safe and healthy, and this idea of noticing a problem and proactively addressing it, it extends far beyond a honeybee colony. In many ways, it mirrors how we approach human health. We don't wait for people to reach critical condition before addressing an issue. We monitor things like blood pressure, heart rate, activity, indicators that allow us to detect problems early, and it guides our preventative care. And just like humans and honeybees rely on these early warning signals, wildlife and ecosystems are also sending us signals, signals that can alert us long before an ecosystem is even at risk of collapsing. Defining health within wildlife populations is a complex idea. Wildlife health, when discussed in research, has really only looked at it in the context of disease, simply looking at the number of individuals that are sick or dying. But these visible signals, such as disease or mass mortality events, are really just the tip of the iceberg, when in reality, the health of a natural ecosystem consists of much more. It's shaped by many underlying factors, and when it's reduced to a single measure such as disease, early warning signs are often missed and population declines are recognized far too late. And then we have climate change, which is exacerbating this issue and introducing multiple overlapping stressors, rising temperatures, shifting seasons, more frequent extreme weather events. They're all altering conditions on which wildlife depend on for survival. Many populations are struggling with warmer winters, for example. These warmer winters can create a better environment for parasites, such as the winter tick. It gives them more time to reproduce and spread in ways that they couldn't before. In the northeastern United States, moose populations this is something that's happening with moose populations in the northeastern United States with the winter tick. At first, nothing super dramatic happens. Populations don't just suddenly collapse. But scientists start to notice these smaller changes, such as patches of hair loss, changes in grooming behavior, bodies looking a little bit too thin than they should. These are still visible indicators, but they occur long before these other major events like population declines or mass mortality events. And so now, scientists better understand the role that parasites play in a changing climate. They can better monitor parasite loads and changing environmental stressors and look at these conditions much more closely. And when we pay attention to these signs, these right here under the surface, we're watching our environment do its own little honeybee waggle dance, telling us that more intense change might be on the way. And just like honeybees respond to their signals, whether it's the waggle dance, the banana-scented alarm pheromone, or the chemical signal given off by varroa-infested brood, we can also listen better to our environment, which would allow us to save time, resources, and provide a better level of protection to our home in the same way that honeybees do for theirs. As our lovely Benjamin Franklin once said, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." This does sound like something that could be a poster in a doctor's office waiting room, or perhaps carved into stone on a prestigious college campus. But it applies just as well to wildlife conservation. By paying closer attention to wildlife health, we can better identify vulnerabilities, anticipate ecological change, and build more resilient ecosystems. The better we listen to the signals around us, the better prepared we will be to protect our own hive. Thank you so much.